Good morning, class. I know it's been a while since we've actually had a um, weekly lecture, mainly because of the holiday and then the storm. And I hope everybody fared through the storm okay. It looks like I haven't really heard too much for you know any kind of issues of people losing a lot of power or internet for a long period of time, which is good. Unlike some of the hurricanes that we've had back in the month of October. So there's a couple things that I'm going to talk about today. We're going to look at the actual assignment three. I'm going to sort of give you my take on it. By doing that, I will show you how to sort of go about approaching it, set it up. It will also cover the lecture as it relates to the two pieces of literature that we're looking at for week three, which is Alice Walker's Everyday Use and Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. We will also look at paper one or essay one or the fiction essay, some of the instructions on that and show you where the topics are. There's a little separate short video on that that's going to be pushed out here in the next hour or so. So you can kind of go back and look at that a little bit as well. I will show you again the style and formatting guide, which you should be seeing right now is the Modular 3. I moved this style and formatting guide down from the first week because you kind of needed it to start citing some of this stuff. But if you click here, it will give you information on how to go about citing fiction. And a lot of this should be familiar from 1101 because I'm assuming everybody in 1101 at some point during that class, it's usually those last few weeks or the last month, you should be writing some sort of, 5 to 7 page research paper where you're having to go out and get sources, from Galileo, from databases, from the internet, and they're usually prose sources. And when we talk about prose writing, it's generally like everyday writing that you would find in a journal magazine or a newspaper or what you do in novels or short stories. It's it's not set up as drama or a play, which we'll talk about. There's another way to cite plays when we get into the month of April. When you're starting to think about your research paper at that point, I'll show you how to go about citing plays. It's not like songs, verse, or poetry. There's a certain way that MLA wants you to cite that. But prose or fiction writing is basically like if you were going to cite something from a journal article, a novel, a book, something online. It's stuff that you should have learned back in 1101. And really, prior to that, especially in high school for some of those dual enrollment students, generally around about the ninth grade, you probably start writing, analytical papers on the fiction that you're reading, or at least you should. That sort of prepares you, especially if you're in college prep or AP courses, for university level work. So if you haven't read this, you really need to go back and kind of look at this particular handout. It's about 3 pages. It talks about how to go about citing in text or what we call parenthetical citations, different types of methods that you may approach. It also talks a little bit about the works cited page that you're going to need to have. You really need to be having this at the end of some of these weekly writings because if you're quoting from that particular work, you need to give credit to that particular author or authors. Now, again, if you're only using one work, it's going to be work without the S. If you're using multiple works, it's going to be works. And you usually center this or center the works cited title, and it's usually on a separate page. There's rules here that you want to follow. So make sure that you're reading this, even though it does say MLA 8, the ninth still follows a good bit of this. Pay attention to how things are color coded here. Notice how things have, like punctuation is in red. Some of the other information is in the green. So just go through this and make sure when you are submitting your final draft of your essay, um, that you have a works cited page and that everything is quoted correctly. Because again, when you submit, it's going to go through a plagiarism checker. And if you're not citing stuff correctly, it's going to, red, green, purple your paper all up for plagiarism. And really, you don't want to have that because that's going to bring me in and really look at it, microscopically about seeing how did this person really plagiarize? Are they using any kind of AI programs? Because the first offense, you're going to get a 0 on the assignment, that's going to hurt your grade tremendously at this point. Um, because by the time we get to week 4, when this thing is due, um, you've only had a few assignments at that point. And this 0 will definitely, it will probably pull you down multiple letter grades. So make sure that you turn something in. And again, this final draft is going to be due on February 9th, which is a Sunday by 11:59 p.m. Now, I believe that's Super Bowl Sunday as well. So if you've got big plans going on, the Dropbox is going to be available. I believe it's available now. I will double check. So you don't have to wait until, 10:30 at night over Super Bowl Sunday. If you feel confident about where you're at, you went through the peer review process, maybe with somebody else in the class, if you know somebody in the class, or you exchanged emails, or at some point, or have anybody outside of class that you can let look at your drafts, and you went through the editing and that process, you can submit early. You don't have to wait until the 9th of February. I would, make sure that you do have somebody sort of go through the peer reviewing process with you, editing and proofreading, and make sure that your spelling's correct, your grammar's correct, things make sense from beginning, middle to end. You're focusing on whatever particular topic you're choosing. You can send me drafts. I don't mind you sending me drafts, but you have to email me your drafts as a Microsoft Word document attachment. Otherwise, I can't mark it up. I can't give you suggestions or feedback. If you send it if you just copy and paste it to the email, I mean, that's not going to do you any good. I can't really comment on it. I mean, I can give you like a general overview, but that's not going to help you in like individual paragraphs. Same thing with PDF files. I can read them, but I can't really mark them up or put comments on them really easily. So if you want feedback, and then this goes back to your submission, when you submit it, the final draft that you want me to grade, make sure that you submit it as a Microsoft Word document as well, especially if you want feedback on the particular paper, so you're not doing sort of the same mistakes if there's any major mistakes on essay 2, which would be the poetry essay. That one would be due a little bit after exam 2, which is going to be your midterm respondent deal. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I plan on next week giving you some information about the actual fiction exam, which is going to be due at the end of week 5. And that's pretty much going to wrap us up on fiction. And then we have 5 weeks of poetry. So we're getting sort of to the end here. Believe it or not, next week marks a whole month that we've actually been in school. I know it hasn't seemed that way because of all the weather holidays and breaks and all that, and we possibly could have another storm system come in. So who knows how that's going to impact the weeks to come. Hopefully it won't do too much damage to our schedule, because that was the only thing, trying to get everybody's schedule, not just for this class. Since this class was online, that's why you had the ability to, that's why I didn't move a lot of things around, just because I was assuming nobody lost power for a long period of time and was able to still email and get stuff in, that type deal. As things move further, I might be able to do some wiggle room just to sort of give you some extra time on certain things. The problem is I don't want to move things back in too many classes, um, because it just sort of clogs us up and compounds us as we get closer to the last month of the semester. And you really don't want to have multiple things due. Um, you don't want to make up a whole bunch of stuff during April when you got other classes and other responsibilities. So that's sort of the reason why I've been kind of doing what I'm doing with this particular class as it relates to, well, he's given a couple, extra days for this class. Well, you got to keep in mind, um, two of those classes are in person. They meet twice a week. I have that flexibility to do that. The one that meets on Monday meets for nearly 2 hours, 3 hours. It's a hybrid, so they have the other 6 days online. So I have flexibility with some of those 1101 classes. The 1102, which has a little bit more students and it's a little bit more involved, um, I don't necessarily have as much flexibility because you're basically online for 7 days a week. And as long as you have internet, you can access your class pretty much anywhere in the world. You're not having to come in for 75 minutes or 90 minutes twice a week. So again, I would definitely go back and look at this particular handout as it relates to quotations and works cited page as we move along, because you're going to need to learn how to quote fiction. You're going to need to learn how to quote poetry. I'll give you some information about how to do that as we get closer to week 6. That's going to start our poetry unit week. And when we get to about, I guess, week 11 or 12, I'll give you some information about how to quote dramas and plays. I'm going to back out of this. If you go here to your modular introduction, goals, and checklist, again, there's going to be some information, textbook reading. This is some more information about the fiction essay, which I'm going to go over a little bit briefly here. This talks a little bit more about the types of characters you will see in literature. You definitely want to, if you're not looking at some of these like characters and point of views, I'm giving you page numbers in your e-text, which also follows some web pages, which directly sort of interacts with these videos if you need additional information and different types of point of view. You want to sort of keep up with these videos and these key terms because everything that we, started from week 1 to week 5 is going to be fair game on that exam. So if it's on Blackboard, or if you've had, videos on Blackboard, or if you've been emailed anything that has, hyperlinks or handouts, anything is going to be fair game. Um, exam 1 can be kind of a challenge, especially if you haven't been keeping up with the videos, the lectures, the readings, that type deal. If you're just sort of skimming these things or going to various sites for like, that kind of act like a summary or a cliff note deal or a spark note or a lit chart, or if you're going to certain, like Khan Academy or that type deal on YouTube to find videos, or using certain AI programs to summarize stuff, then you're probably going to be in a world of hurt when it comes to exam 1 during week 5. Right now, the plan is that the exam will have about 3 sections. I may modify that a little bit. I just have to see, but it will cover all the stories that we've read up until week 5. It will cover pretty much, or anything could be at that point fair game. Anything, literary terms related where you have hyperlinks or videos or page numbers to in your modulars from week 1 to week 5. I will give you a study guide. There probably is sort of a study guide out there that sort of gives you the example of how one of my tests or one of my fiction tests looks like in the past. So you can kind of look at that to get the lay of the land, so to speak, the format, that type deal. But I give you a little bit additional information to sort of focus, to kind of help you study. So at least point you in the direction or give you sort of like a blueprint of what you really need to study for and the stuff that you want to really not waste your time on. It's not one of those exams that, I mean, if you don't study for it, don't prepare for it, obviously you're not going to do well on it. That goes without saying. I sort of set the exam as it relates to difficulty medium of the road, meaning if you know your stuff and you studied and you looked at everything and you're keeping up with the class, doing really good, having good grades, then you're going to probably think the exam is going to be easy. If you haven't been doing what you need to be doing, kind of just coming and going, skipping stuff, not turning stuff in, not reading, not watching, not asking questions, then the exam is going to be quite difficult. If you're sort of in between that, halfway this, halfway that, and you're going to feel like it's going to be on a medium level. So it's not one of those that tries to trap you or tries to fail you, but it is one of those that you will fail yourself if you don't prepare for it. So there's not going to be really any trick questions or nothing like that. But if you don't study for it, prepare for it, you're not going to do too well on it. Those that usually study and prepare do fairly decent or really well on the exam. Sometimes I've built in I put some extra credit points in the exam to kind of help you boost that grade up as well. Of course, that's optional. You don't have to do the extra credit because the exam will be timed. And technically, you're not really supposed to use any notes, any, text, any e-text, any videos, anything outside. So kind of keep that in mind. I know that's going to be hard for me to gauge really because you're going to be doing this in the comfort of your own home. There's not a proctor for this particular exam. Now for your midterm, which would be exam 2 with poetry, you will have a proctor exam. It's going to be the respondus exam. So you will have somebody watching and recording your actions. Um, there's some information about the respondus deal in your syllabus. If you've had an online course before in the past, you use Respondus, especially if you went to this college in the last couple semesters. So you kind of know what you're going to need. You're going to need to have, working computer, working internet. You're going to need a working mic and a working webcam all turned on during the 60 minutes of that particular exam. Again, this is for the Respondus midterm exam. This is going to happen later next month. So kind of keep that in mind. Really, it's going to happen probably about the time we have midterms, which is about week 7 and week 8 as a college. I'll give you some additional information on that. But just if you're kind of looking ahead, you're not going to want to be caught cheating using notes and stuff. So I'm just going to go by the honor system that, you're not going to go out and actually use your notes and use each other and all that stuff. But I'm not stupid. I know people get around that and stuff. So, but just some tall tale signs that I can tell that's going to be going on. If you finish the exam up really quickly, I mean this exam is the first one. It's going to take you a little bit of time. You're not just going to be able to go in there, even if you know your stuff, you're just not going to be able to go in there and be done with it in 20 minutes. So it's going to take you a little bit of time. Some folks need nearly an hour. Um, I think I'm going to give everybody a little bit longer than the traditional 60 minutes. I'll probably give you maybe 90 minutes, something like that. But for most people, they need nearly the full 40, 50, maybe 60 minutes, if not longer, to go back and kind of proofread and look at their answers. So, I mean, if you go through that and finish that thing in about, 27 minutes, I'm probably going to think, and especially if your answers are really, really polished, then I'm going to know something's up. You're either copy and pasting stuff, you're using, some kind of AI program, something. So kind of keep that in mind. If answers look similar to other students' answers, and I'm going to think maybe y'all work together somehow. Maybe you go to the same, especially if you're dual enrollment, maybe you go to the same high school and you got together at somebody's house and started comparing answers. So, I mean, we know a little bit of these tricks. We know most of these tricks of the trade. I've been doing this, last 20 years or so. So just be wary, be careful. Don't get yourself set up where you're getting you don't need a 0 on the first exam either, because like I said, zeros really hurt the grade. They will probably bring you down about 2 letter grades. So that's about 20 points. Now, granted, this is early on. It could bring you down a lot more just because we don't have a lot of assignments. The two readings are right here. This sort of gives you a little bit more summary about the lottery and also of everyday use. So what I would probably recommend is that you actually, read these stories that are right here and then come back to the videos. Unless you're one of those people that like to read what's going on and then go back and actually do the reading. Again, that's up to you, however you tackle the reading process, as long as you're understanding and you're getting something out of it to help you with answering the assignment question for this week, which we're going to take a look at here momentarily. And you can always email me if you have any questions. Somebody in the class, I think yesterday or the day before, they emailed about sending drafts and stuff. And again, anything that's written that's considered a major stake assignment, which would be, essay one, essay two, the research paper, that type stuff, you can always send me drafts. The earlier, the better. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't wait to send me a draft. If you got something that's 6 pages and it's due in 2 hours, I'm not going to be able to do much with that. So give me a few days will probably be the best. If you can give me nearly up to a week, that would be even better because that give me enough time to really digest what you're writing for me to understand and then pick out the stuff that you would need, positive, constructive feedback. Because when I give you feedback, I'm giving you feedback that's going to say, hey, if you do this, it will make your grade get higher. So you may be at a C now. If you do this, it could give you a B. You're at a B now, this could give you an A. So you need to follow and go by my feedback and suggestions. You can always use tutor.com for another set of eyes, which I would suggest that you do. Because whatever I miss, maybe they catch, vice versa. Whatever they miss, maybe I catch because we're only human. And especially since I got 4 other classes looking at essays on a continuous basis, I'm here 10-hour days, 4 days a week, go home, wife, kids, we're all human. I'm not a robot. We get tired. Especially since we're reading a lot of this stuff and dealing with the computer screen and all that. So utilize the free help is basically what I'm getting. As it relates to like the quizzes and exams and that type stuff, I can't really help you on that. I can give you maybe some hints or suggestions, but I can't give you too much because otherwise that might spoil what the answer is. But anything that's weekly, like the weekly writing assignments, like you had to do, I guess, for week one with the Chopin piece and what you have to do for this week's. You can send me drafts of those if you want, because really that's weekly writing stuff. It's low stake writing that I can give you pointers, I can give you help before you submit the final draft of that particular work. Plus, that will sort of get you gauged in how I think and how I grade and how I give you comments and feedback. So when you get to something bigger, like essay one coming up, you will see how I'm going about my organization and structuring and logic and thinking and that type stuff. So if you want to send drafts of this week's assignment, you can. You can find this week's assignment right here. And this is what we're going to base our little lecture on here momentarily. It looks like 2 people have actually submitted. We'll come back and check those. But again, you have up until February the 2nd, 11:59. Again, you can turn in earlier. If you want to send me a draft of this, please do so. I would do it before Sunday though, because obviously Sunday is going to it can be kind of a hit and miss, can get kind of crazy. So I would say if you're going to send me a draft, I would do it before Friday, before we go for the weekend and I get into my off days. Not to say I won't read stuff on Friday and Saturday. It may just take it a little bit longer for you to get it back, especially if you send it late Friday or late Saturday, that type deal. So basically, it wants you to, in 250 words, roughly about a page, if you use MLA format and double space, we'll double check to see these 2 submissions here, see if they're doing it right. They want you to compare the tradition and Walker's everyday use to that of Jackson's The Lottery. So we're going to look at that here momentarily. I'm going to show you how I kind of outlined my particular example, which may help you when it comes to longer papers, like the particular paper 1, which I'm going to show you again here momentarily. I'm going to briefly go over that. But I'm going to show you how I set up and approach the lecture, but I'm also going to show you how I did my writing. So if you need something to kind of go by, you can kind of look at what I have here. This could be a really good technique as it comes to the analytical essay. Again, essay 1 that's going to be due next week. Sometimes in high school, depending on what level of English you're in, whether you're, regular English class, college prep, AP, usually college prep and AP probably gives you a little bit more discipline when it comes to college level academic writing, or at least they should. A regular English class probably won't go in full detail about the analytical and critical thinking as much because they may think, hey, you're in the vocational track, you're probably not going to go per se to a university, or you probably not going to do too much more literature style classes moving along, so they don't go over everything that you may need to know to be successful when it comes to writing, doing a close reading on literature and short stories and that type of stuff. So real quick, let me look at these submissions, and I'm going to look at those paper topics, give you sort of some information on that. Let's see. Morgan's got one. Lily, I think it's got one. So let me see how this. I haven't graded these yet. I know I have a couple quizzes from last week I still need to grade. So by the end of this week, those quizzes should be graded. So if you look here, the format, I mean, it's on Microsoft Word, but if you notice, there's no header. I mean, obviously I can come here and know that it's you, but you need to sort of style it because you're going to need to style the essay that you got to turn in next week and the assignment that you got to do this week in the proper MLA 9 format, which you should have learned in English 1101. This is correct. Last name and page number, you need that at the top right-hand corner. Some folks were losing points for that. So you need to have the header here, which is your first name, last name, my name, the course number, which you can abbreviate English 1102, and then I would say the date that the actual assignment is due. So in this case, this is due on Sunday. I would put that, that it's due then. And then you need to center your title. Your essay needs to have a catchy, creative title as well. Just don't call it fiction essay or essay 1 or rename the stories that you're doing. Give it some kind of creative hook that sort of reflects to the writing and the paragraphs to come. And you're going to need to, again, center that. So this needs to be centered. Make sure that you're indenting your paragraphs properly, which is basically, you're tabbing it one time. If you try to do the space bar 5 times, sometimes that works, but sometimes it looks kind of goofy. So I would go, get in the habit of tabbing your paragraphs. The works cited, again, this needs to be centered. This looks correct. It's in alphabetical order by author's last name. And again, because they're using 2, that's why we have the S. If it was just using Jackson, then you would just have work. We have, again, the last name and the page number. So really the only problem here is it's missing the header, and the paragraph situation needs to be a little bit more, following the MLA guidelines. The person's using quotations, which again, if you look, when I show you mine, I'm going to show you how to go about doing that. In my particular one, I use footnotes. I can show you or give you some information about how to use footnotes if you don't know what you're doing. I was trying to get something done kind of quickly, so I did the footnote part. But either way, footnote or works cited page, you want to be consistent. You don't want to do both. But I'll show you how I did mine. And it looks like this person did really well with the quotations. We have the author's last name and the page number, author's last name and the page number. If you use the same author after you initially provide the author's last name, you can just give me the page number after that. You don't have to keep saying Walker 6, Walker 9, Walker 10, unless you start getting, later into your paper and we sort of forget who you're referring to. Then you might want to pop it back in there a few times. Same thing with the Jackson stuff. Again, 250 words when you double space is going to be about a full page, give or take. That's all I'm really looking for, as long as you address the question. And use quotations to sort of support, because you're going to have to use quotations from these works in the essay that's going to be due next week. Let's look at Morgan's, which this is what I was talking about. The header, really good. She put the date that she wrote it, which is fine. The reason why I just say put the date that it's due, it's sort of, especially if you're working on this, you're not trying to get it finished all in one day. If you're doing it one day at a time or whatever, you're sort of remind yourself, hey, this thing is going to be due, the 2nd or the 3rd of February, whatever the case may be. But this is fine. Again, we have the last name and the first name. This is how the title should look. It's centered. These paragraphs are more in the line of the MLA9 format because they are tabbed, and they sort of, if you take my cursor here and sort of go down, I can form a straight line. It's doing that. It's basically 5 spaces. Here, I guess it all depends if they're not using, I don't know what version, if she's using the version that's online, there should be some page numbers. But if there's not page numbers, if you're using a different version, which is fine, you don't want to make up page numbers. If it's something online with no page numbers, you usually just want to keep the author's last name. And in this case, you probably would have to kind of keep doing that because otherwise with that, your reader may not understand where you're getting the work. Sometimes you may have to count your own paragraphs, and that can sort of, take the place of page numbers. So to be sort of like Walker, and then you abbreviate paragraph PAR period 7 that this might have came from. So you can kind of do that, but you're probably going to have to count your own paragraphs, and that can kind of be a pain, especially if the document's long. But if you do that, you want to be consistent. Just don't do it for one story and don't do it for the other one. So yes, using quotations, it looks like correctly. Keep in mind that when you're writing about literature, and we need to talk a little bit about this, that literary characters do not die. Authors die, playwrights die, poets die, but literary characters do not die. So what I'm getting at is when you're writing about fiction, poetry, drama, if you're talking about characters, like in this case, D, it's D states, not stated, because D in the literary world is still alive. So we use, and when we talk about, analyzing literature, and this is what maybe your high school teachers won't go into. They should, especially at the college level or college prep or the AP level, that when you write about literature, it needs to be in what they call historical present tense or literary present, meaning everything's going to be in present tense, unless you need to kind of sort of refer back to certain things. But most times when you write about literature, keep it in present tense. Shakespeare is dead, yes, but Hamlet still lives in a literary sense. So, when you're quoting Hamlet, you're going to say Hamlet says or claims. You're not going to say Hamlet said. I know, sometimes that's kind of awkward because we're thinking that Hamlet, is dead. Well, he's really not dead. He's actually going to outlive everybody because he's a written piece of work that's, was studied back in the 15th and 1600s. He's studied today. When we're all dead and gone, somebody's going to be studying him in the year 3000 if the world is still here. So the literary work is going to live on. So the same as the characters in these stories that we've read the last 3 or 4 weeks, they're going to live on. So if you're writing about literature, poetry, drama, it's going to be literary present tense. And if you need additional information, reach out about that. But you can probably look at some information, Google, type in literary present tense, or go to YouTube. Probably there's some videos there you can kind of watch to kind of give you a little bit more of an understanding of that. But I just wanted to point that out because Morgan has a lot of that with the past tense when it needs to be present tense. So kind of keep that in mind. I probably won't, because I'm assuming that you probably would have learned that 10th and 11th grade. I'm assuming definitely if you passed 1101, which if you're in this class, you had to make a C or higher, that your 1101 instructor should have talked to you a little bit about literary present tense. Even though you didn't probably use a lot of it during that particular class, they should have talked about it at probably toward the end, especially for those students that were getting ready to, take this class. And you would need it, if you're taking an American Lit next or World Lit next or a special topic class on Romantic poets or something, you're going to need to kind of know whatever you learn in 1101, 1102, that's sort of the foundation that's going to help you for any other upper level English courses that you have to either take here or if you transfer to another college. The other thing is keep in mind, like here, you can kind of keep contractions when you're quoting because it's part of the story. You as a writer, again, this is something that you should have learned from 1101. You really need to spell out contractions. So you need to make 2 words instead of 1. So when you're writing your stuff, when you're writing your essay, when you're writing your little page for this week, make sure if you're using contractions that you're spelling them out. Because that will help you get to the 250 word count. Plus, it looks more professional, formal, scholarly, and all that stuff. The other thing is numbers. Again, this is coming back from 1101. If you are using numbers that are 100 or less, you need to spell those out. Anything above 100, like 101 all the way up, you can kind of leave those in number form unless you start the sentence with a number. Using second person pronouns, unless they're part of a quotation, you, your, you need to cut that out and use either first person or third person. Generally in academic writing, if you're writing about literature, generally they want you to be a little bit more objective than subjective, so they would prefer that you used third person pronouns. Stuff like he, she, it, the reader, the audience, the writer, that type stuff. And generally, sometimes, I will see folks, they would say the quote says this, or the quote does this, or the text says this, or the text doesn't do nothing. The quote doesn't do nothing. It's the writer says this. The writer wrote the text. It's the character that spoke the quote. So don't give me, when you're starting this quote stuff, well, the quote states this, or the reading says this. Well, no, it really doesn't. It's either a person does, a character does. So sort of get out of the habit of doing that. That's something that really your middle school and high school teachers, really probably your elementary school teachers, should have told you not to do. But for whatever reason, they either did and you forgot it, they didn't, and they didn't care because they thought the next grade that literature or language arts teacher would do it. But get out of that habit. It's not a good habit to have, and you will lose points for it. Be careful too, right? It is stated. Well, what is it? Be careful of these vague pronouns, right? It needs to have something. Is it a person? Is it a character? Is it a dog? Is it a plant? Is it an alien? Something stated it. Who was it? Or somebody states it, right? Because again, this is in past tense. It needs to be present tense. The other thing is be careful of starting sentences with this is or there are, there is. Again, they're sort of filler sentences that don't really tell you much. A lot of students like to do that because it does add a couple more words, but it's really filler. You want to be specific of what this is. So you really need to kind of have a noun there. This noun is. This person is. Something of that nature. The other thing is make sure that when you use short story titles that you put quotation marks. They're inside quotation marks. Don't quotation marks and also italicize. Don't italicize them. Don't put nothing. They need to have quotation marks around them. Some folks will be losing points or have lose points because of that. Again, that's stuff that you should have learned back in 1101 or definitely in high school. Okay, really the only problem I have with this works cited page, this is centered, but it has everything else centered. So this needs to go more to the left. This needs to go more to the left, left line. If you do find that your citation goes beyond the first line, then all of those additional lines need to be in hanging indent form. So there's a feature in Microsoft Word that will help you do that. So again, first lines are never indented. They're always left aligned. If you go beyond that first line, those lines will always be hanging indent. So besides those little things, I mean, this looks, I mean, I'd have to go back and kind of reread it. This is going on, It's 2 pages. So it goes a little bit more than the one, which that's not too terribly bad. I mean, I just don't want you to turn this into a full-fledged essay because only you needed to have 1 page. Now, what you could do with this, and if you feel comfortable, again, this is up to you, you could take this particular writing critique and extend it into a full-length essay. Meaning, when we go and look at these essay topics, I think they needed to be what, 3 to 6 pages. So you could use this as a topic. You'd have to kind of change the title. You'd have to go back and add more stuff. But you could use this as sort of, really a rough draft of your essay one if you wanted to, if you like these two stories. You certainly don't have to. The same thing is, I guess you can kind of extend on maybe um, the modular one assignment dealing with the Chopin piece. Of course, you probably really have to extend on that a little bit and pair it up with something. So let's briefly look at these topics, and then we're going to get into the actual lecture here real quick. So again, this paper needs to be 3 to 6 pages or 750 to 1,500 words, whatever comes first. This is not including the works cited, but the works cited page needs to be there. So if you finish on page 3, your works cited page needs to be on page 4. If you finish on page 6, your works cited page needs to be on page 7. You see how that works. Again, we're using MLA 9. Everything's going to be double space times Roman 12. You've known a lot of these other stuff. You want to use quotations from the text. Primary text are the text that we've been reading over the last 4 weeks. If you do go outside and use scholarly materials, websites, journal articles, books, then you need to cite those appropriately as well, because again, you don't want to get flagged for plagiarism. I wouldn't necessarily, fall back and use a lot of lit charts and Spark Notes and Cliff Notes. They are a tool, and some of them are written, professionally and academically by students, but sometimes they're not. And really, they give you more plot summary to help you unpack and understand the story than they do any kind of analysis. Now, if some of these places have essays or like journal type articles that you can use to quote from, and you need to use it, by all means you can. But I would just be wary, because a lot of times, we in the academic world don't see Spark Notes and Cliff Notes as being 100% legit scholarly material, even though, they are written for students in mind. Just some of it's sort of like the Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not a really good scholarly website to use either, because anybody can go on there day or night who knows how to type and spell can put a bunch of BS up there and call it, legit, when it's not. We've read that, we've seen that in, years gone by. So just be careful, be wary about the whole Spark Notes, Cliff Notes. That's not to say that you can't use it, to read it, to use it for a study guide, for an exam, for a quiz, that type deal. But as far as quoting from those, I really would rather that you don't. I would rather that you go to, like Galileo or a library or a database and find really legit scholarly articles by other English professors and that type stuff, because we're sort of in that genre and that community of writing about literature for the sake that other folks can use it and quote from it and build from it. But the other thought is, you don't necessarily have to use secondary scholar. This is not really a research paper. It's more or less like a close reading based on the text that we've read. So you really have 6 topics. We're pretty much in our week up to number 4. So if you realized, week 1, we did week 1 and 2, we had the Chopin and the Hemingway piece. This week we have number 3 and 4, which is basically the Jackson and the everyday use piece. Next week we're going to get more into 5 and 6. So I'm thinking here that you can kind of read these. I'm not going to waste too much time reading these, because I'm not going to insult your intelligence. But if you do have any questions about 1 through 6, if you don't understand something, I mean, obviously, if you haven't, read ahead 5 and 6 for 5 and 6, then that might not be you may not understand too much what's going on there because you haven't read those stories yet. But by the time we get to the end of this week, you should have already read the short stories on number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 topic. So that means, unless you just want to do something for 5 or 6, either you're going to have to read ahead if you're caught up. If you wait to next week to finally decide on a topic, you're really going to be crunching your time because let's say, I mean, the paper is going to be due. Let's say you finally pick a topic this coming Sunday. Well, you got 6 days to write 3 to 6 pages and make sure that it's really good. So what I would suggest, if you're kind of looking for time management, if procrastination is not your friend, and especially because of everything going on with the weather and the holiday, and we got the Super Bowl coming up in another week or 2 weeks, I would say by the time we get maybe to Thursday or Friday of this week, because Saturday is going to be February 1st, right? We're slowly wrapping up our unit on fiction. I would say by February 1st, you really need to have a topic in mind. I would say probably by Monday or Tuesday, the 3rd or the 4th, you should already have 3 to 6 pages of a draft written. And then you could take Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and possibly Saturday, 5 through 8, to really revise your work. You can send me drafts, you can send tutor.com drafts, that type deal. So by the time we get to the 9th, and before the Super Bowl, if you wanted to kind of stretch it and wait all the way to the 9th, you will have enough time to submit that before the 6 o'clock or the 6:30 kickoff. Now, again, you have until 11:59 of that Sunday. Of course, the Dropbox is open now. So if you really got on it and worked through it, let's say that you wanted to do let's say you want to do 6 pages. You could take tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's 5 days right there. So each day you could be devoting on a page. Monday could have been your 6th. So now you have from the 4th to the 9th to send me a draft, send, smart or tutor.com a draft, or, get help from somebody outside. But you would have enough time that you won't feel rushed or get to the point, because a lot of times what happens is we get caught up, we get busy, we forget, we procrastinate, and we get to next weekend and realize, well, I do realize Mr. Wilson said we had an essay and the topics were up there actually during a modular 2. So the topics would, by the time this thing is due, the topics would have been on, the blackboard for at least 3, maybe 4 weeks at that point. So it's not like I'm just throwing this stuff on you, 2 days before it's due. You've had plenty of time if you use time wisely. So what I'm getting at is don't wait until, Saturday the 8th and say, oh shit, now I got 3 pages at least or 4 pages and I need to go back and, kind of read and take notes and get the quotes and stuff out. And that's just going to ruin your Saturday. It's going to ruin a part of your Super Bowl Sunday because now you're going to be worried about it. So you be proactive about this. Work smarter, not harder. Take a little bit each day, and you'll be able to get it done in no time. Just don't wait. I hate when folks wait. That's when you get into the habit of good students start to do foolish things, like they try to buy a paper from online. Sometimes they get ripped off. They try to copy and paste crap. Now they're getting into the plagiarism part of it. They try to use AI and they think that, I won't find out. Well, we're going to find out if you're using AI. There's a lot of different free things that we can use. If you can find it online, we can find it as well. Free or paid. So kind of keep that in mind. What I was going to show you real quick, and then we're going to get on to the lecture because I know this thing is dragging on and I need to try to get some lunch here soon. Tutor.com is right here. Utilize that for your rough drafts. Upload it, follow the information, give them some directions, some guidance, let them know what you're trying to do, what the assignment's about. Just don't, say, hey, can you look at this? Because chances are they may or may not be able to know what you're wanting them to really zone in on. Again, we have the MLA 9 handbook that could be helpful when it comes to quoting in particular different areas of fiction. E-text is still right there. It's always been there. And then, of course, you can find when things are due date wise, through the simple syllabus that's always been there as well. So let me pull up my little outline. Well, let me show you this. I put this up. I think this is up in week 4. This is the actual rubric that I want to be using to grade your final draft. So you can kind of use this as a checklist. If you want to go back and kind of look and see if you're doing things right? We go from A, B, C, D, F, which really it's 59 below is considered an F. I'm hoping nobody gets D's or F's. I hope everybody gets the C's or higher. I mean, obviously getting A's and B's is going to, require a little bit more work. C is just getting by, which most folks could probably get that. It's really easy to get a D and F. Just don't put a lot of effort in it. But I know that, you're responsible adults. Some of y'all have grade point averages and stuff that are on the line here as it relates to dual enrollment and that type of stuff. You probably want to get the best possible grade, the honorable way and the reasonable way and the logical way. So go through and look at this particular rubric. If you have any questions, let me know, but it kind of tells you the point system, that type deal, what things are worth. Thesis and arguments, 30%. Textual evidence and analysis, meaning you got to quote from stuff, that's 30%. So if you're not quoting enough or quoting the right materials from these texts, you're going to lose 30 points right there. So let's say you just turn in a 4-page essay and there's no quotations at all. Well, the highest you could possibly make, granted that everything else is going to be good, which is going to be hard to do if you don't have anything to back up your claims, would be a 7. So you're starting your grade at a 70 when I'm reading, and then I'm grading down at that point. So keep in mind, right? This is a sophomore level college course. This is not a 10th grade English course. Things will get graded harshly here if you're not following the instructions, if you're not following the rubric as your checklist, if you're not getting help with proofreading or editing, right? 20 and 20% here. Grammar and mechanics count, commas count. Use spell check. Everything in the world, it seems, has a spell check. If you can't spell stuff or use grammar check, I mean, that's telling me there that you're just lazy or you're waiting until the last minute, because that's 20 points of your grade. So again, if everything else was correct and you didn't spell check and grammar check using Microsoft Editor or Grammarly or whatever the case may be, the highest you could possibly make at that point now is an 80, which is still a B, but it's a low B. Had you corrected all that, you could have been in the upper tier, upper B plus or maybe A plus range. So make sure that you go back and you're looking at this stuff and you're having good detail at not only the major stuff but the minor stuff. It's a lot of times it's this minor stuff like the format and stuff that really screws people's grades up. You know, John could have had a 95, but because he didn't go back and spell check and grammar check and he didn't use MLA format and he was a day or so late, that's the other thing. You need to kind of get these papers in on time. John lost, 24 points because he didn't do all this stuff. Yeah, it seems like a lot. It is. Does it seem harsh? Yes. But again, we're sophomore level English college course at this point. We're not 9th grade English. Things are going to, count more. Things are going to be worth more. And a lot of this stuff, like the spell and the grammar and all that, you should have learned that 1101. You should have learned a lot of this stuff back in 2nd, 3rd grade. Not to be rude, not to be funny, but it's the truth. We learned how to spell. We had spelling tests, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. So, I mean, that was before all these fancy spell checkers and autocorrectors and all this other crap came out. So if you need to go to, online, go to an online dictionary or an online thesaurus. They're all free. There's online dictionaries and thesauruses built into, Microsoft Word, Grammarly, a lot of stuff. All right, so let me pull up. We're going to do this little outline here. I'm going to turn this off in a minute so we can kind of look at it. This is sort of my outline. This, again, I sort of approached that same question that you did or that you need to be doing for this week. So this is the outline I used. again, if you're not using outlines, especially when it comes to bigger assignments like the fiction essay, the poetry essay coming up, I would, because it sort of um, keeps you on track. It makes your message seem clear in a lot of ways. So the outline have here, basically, right? We're looking at contrasting traditions and everyday use and the lottery, right? So tradition as a living heritage, right? We want to talk about the quilts, right? They are a symbol of family history and Walker's story. And by the way, Walker is a native of Georgia, so she's a Georgia writer. If you haven't realized that or didn't look up additional information, I would definitely go back and look when I give you these authors. Look at what go to Google and do like a short biography. I think I provide sometimes with these videos, but you can always go to YouTube and look. So a lot of these biographies are about 2 or 3 minutes. At least get a general idea of who this author is that you're reading. She was an African American, obviously. Some of you probably know her from her novel, The Color Purple. There have been two movies. The first one, I think, was made in 1985, which is a really good classic. It has a very young and up and coming Oprah Winfrey in there, as well as Danny Glover. They had a recent one, I think, within the last 2 or 3 years that was actually filmed on Jekyll Island, Georgia. I haven't had a chance to look at that one, but it's a little bit more of a modern interpretation of that. Say if you have a chance, Hulu or Netflix, that might be something else that if you have time to go back and maybe look at The Color Purple. If you haven't watched either one of the films, I would say I would read the book. Of course, I'm an English teacher. I'm going to tell you that. But the book's really good too. Walker's a really good writer. Um, the book's pretty the book goes pretty fast, I believe. I mean, it is a novel, it is kind of lengthy. She uses a lot of the African American dialect. So sometimes that can be kind of hard to read if you don't know how to approach it. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward um, with the narrative and with the tale. So we look at, right, we have 2 points here. We have Mama's practical perspective intended for the use. And notice how I pull quotes out. This is going to be helpful too, because if you make an outline, whether it's informal or um, formal, you can pull out quotes from that text. So that can kind of help you cut down on your writing time, or at least when it comes to doing research for quotes. D's, right? We have the two daughters, right? D's aesthetic perspective, intended for display. Again, we have this quote here I want to talk about. We have D's detachment. This is my B point. Rejection of family legacy. We have the name change. Again, we have another good quote. And then we have Maggie's, right? Maggie's connection, embodiment of lived tradition. So we really have sort of like the old school daughter, old school mentality that sort of follows with mama's beliefs. And then we have the other daughter who's a little bit more enlightened. She's more modern. She's more fancy, I guess you can say. She's more trendy or hip, right? At least in her mind. So we have the difference of really old school tradition and this sort of modern or new school tradition. And it was really a big thing for a lot, especially during the time of the 60s and 70s when Walker wrote this. It was cool to have a lot of these older family heirlooms and treasures to sort of just be hung around, especially if you grew up like in the hippie age and that type deal. You've always with the music and all that stuff. Of course, you had the drugs, the rock and roll, and the sex and all that. But a lot of these family heirlooms and historical pieces, a lot of those types of younger folks would just enjoy having that, but didn't really fully understand what it meant as a legacy historically to their family. And that's sort of what's going on with Dee here, right? Because she eventually changes her name. Um, when we get to the lottery, which is Jackson's piece, it was written about probably 20 or 30 years prior to Walker's piece. And this we have the tradition as a destructive ritual. So again, we have this juxtaposition position, right? Good literary word there. I would definitely look that up. That's probably in one of those videos, or you can see, in your table of contents, your literary terms and your e-text. That's probably going to be helpful because you may see it on the exam here in another week. We have normacy and we have violence, right? We have children gathering stones. Again, I have a quote here we're going to look at here momentarily. Um, we also have the black box, right? Symbolism. It's another good literary term you probably want to keep in mind. You might want to go back and, take notes on some of the stuff that are symbolic in each one of these stories, because that could pop up as one of your questions, maybe on the section one, where it's basically you have to name person, place, thing, date, that type deal. I may give some symbols, and the black box may be one of those symbols. You just have to sort of tell me about. And basically, the symbol here of the black box is the decaying tradition, right? We have this physical description. It's splintered, it's patched. We'll look at that here momentarily. We have Old Man Warner. Again, kind of pay attention to some of these. This week, we're looking at various characters, right? Static characters, dynamic characters. If you go back and watch that video this week, you can probably understand a little bit more of the characterizations. So minor characters, major characters, characters in general will play and help drive your story from one point to the next. So he's the voice of the blind adherents, um, resistance to change, right? A lot of folks, even today in 2025, we don't like change. We tend to fight it for whatever reason. I think a lot of it is it's just human nature. We've sort of set our ways, especially if you have grandparents. If you have parents that are getting up in age, they start setting their ways as well. They have a certain routine. They have to do it this way. If they don't do it that way, the world ends. They get in a big argument. They start throwing stuff and yelling, and they think the world is basically going to blow up now because they didn't do it. Somebody didn't follow their sort of guidance. And as we get older, we're going to probably be just like them in a lot of ways. um, that could be a good thing, that could be a sad thing, depends on how you look at it. But we do, I mean, as humans, we have this. And even animals, when you think about it, think about your cat or dog. Even if you have a bird, when you change up their environment or their setting, they don't, I mean, they have a hard time adjusting. Eventually, they sort of get into a routine, a better routine, maybe not so much, but they do sort of adjust to it or adapt to it. Humans are the same way. Sometimes it takes us a little longer, depending on how long we want to fight, cuss, argue, throw stuff, punch walls, cry, whatever the case may be. Especially young children, they don't like change rapidly, change fast. We've had a lot of changes this month, right? I mean, when you think about it, we started week one pretty much with not a whole lot happening weather-wise. Then we have, the typical Martin Luther King holiday, and then we're told that, hey, we're going to be off the rest of the week because of this snowstorm. So for a lot of folks, that probably presented some anxiety, because now we go from week one to week three basically. And we didn't really, I mean, we had stuff for week two, but it was just like, well, it's just week two and we're not really in class or whatever the case may be. Um, so that was a change. And for some folks, that could have disrupted a lot of things. Um, Community, complicity, the danger of unquestioning acceptance. So kind of keep that in mind. We see a lot of that today, especially. I'm not going to try to get too political here, but within the political cycle, there's been a lot of folks, especially if you got social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, probably more or less any of those that you can, make videos, upload it, and kind of discuss, in a chat room type deal. You're going to have people that disagree on, just about anything these days. And then they have to bring up whoever the president is at the time. That's because you're supporting that person, right? You're supporting Biden, or you're supporting Trump, or you're supporting Harris, or whatever the case may be. And they don't really know who the person is, right? But it's just easier to go and say, well, the reason why you're thinking that way is because they lump you into that political party, whether you're liberal, Democrat, Republican, conservative, Christian, um, atheist. They lump you in these categories, and they may not, I mean, you may not be any one of those, but it's just easier, especially on the days of the easy days online, right? The keyboard warriors, as we call them. It's easy to hide behind a computer and spit a bunch of BS that you probably would never say in front of the person's face, unless you want to get a couple teeth knocked out. Might save you a trip to go to the dentist or something. But I mean, most people ain't going to go up to you and talk that BS if they mention Walmart. Um, some are kind of foolish enough to try it, and then they regret the consequences. But a lot of not I would say probably nine chances out of 10, you're probably never going to meet those folks in real life anyway. We have Miss De Crux, however you want to say her name, her participation, and then we have the climax, the brutality of blind obedience, and then Tessa's final protest. So let me pull up the writing I have. I'm going to quickly go through this because I know this is going on. This is about nearly 75 minutes at this point, which is good because, like I said, some of these are going to go longer because we don't really meet like 2 days a week and that type deal. So sometimes these lectures need to go about a 75 minutes, maybe longer, just to sort of capture the entire 7 days, right? So this is how I approached it. I mean, granted, I don't have the header, so yes, I would need to have the header and the last name, the page number, and that type of stuff. But if you look, I mean, and this is a little bit lengthier than what yours needs to be, but looking ahead toward SA4, SA1 for week 4, this is getting in that length. This would be 3 pages. If you wanted to extend on this particular topic. Now, again, I did footnotes instead of the works cited page. Had I done the works cited page, then obviously page 4 would be where my works cited page would be. But again, if you want to learn how to do works cited page, as you can tell, the footnotes are in the numbers. I will show you how to go about doing that. It's where you list now the sources are here. You can still use a works cited generator to help you with the actual citations, but it's a little different. Instead of having last name, first name, this one has first and last. So when we look at this, right? Again, what I have in red here, this is my thesis statement, and this is what I was talking about. Everything that you write in here needs to have a thesis statement, whether it's a short, low-stake assignment like you're having to do for week 1, week 3. It needs to have something. It needs to have a blueprint about what you're going to talk about in those 250 words or however long it needs. For a bigger paper or a major stake assignment like the first fiction essay, 3 to 6 pages, again, I need to know the main idea. Your audience, your reader, your grader needs to know your main idea of your paper. So when we look at this, the stuff in red, this is my thesis statement. And generally, it's one complete sentence that's going to talk about what's left, what's to come. And of course, I would need to have a title up here as well. So I'd go back. Sometimes the title thing is, it seems like it's a small thing, but sometimes it's the hardest thing to come up with. So what I would suggest with the title maybe is write your paper out and then come back toward the end and, kind of create a catchy creative title that encompasses the entire 3-page paper or whatever the case may be. So when we look at this, is both Alice Walker's Everyday Use and Shirley Jackson's The Lottery explore the complex and multifaceted nature of tradition. They offer starkly contrasting perspectives on its value and potential consequences. Walker's story celebrates the importance of understanding and embracing the lived experience of heritage, emphasizing the continuity of tradition within a family. Jackson, conversely, again, good transition words that I'm using in here, and you want to use transition words in your own writing as well. You don't have to pepper your writing so much with them, but there is a need for delivers a chilling indictment of blind adherence to rituals, exposing the potential for the tradition to devolve into barbarity when divorced from reason and compassion. So here again, here's my thesis. This is what I'm sort of going to prove in the next, two and a half pages or whatever. Through carefully chosen details and contrasting characterizations, everyday use champions a living, breathing heritage, while the lottery serves as a cautionary tale, warning against the dangers of unexamined and potentially destructive traditions, which it does. Again, really two different periods. It's all within a span, I guess, of about 40 years. But we have an African American tradition, and then we have sort of this white rural tradition. Sets up the contrast nicely. Um, Things are not always, when it comes to tradition, they're not always black and white, right? There are shades of gray, and we see a lot of these shades of gray in both pieces. We also see shades of gray in our own family history and our own tradition, and we see shades of gray now in 2025 in our daily world, our daily society. Things are not nice and neat, always black and white when it comes to family traditions. In everyday use, heritage is central, particularly as embodied by the quilts, right? Big deal is those quilts. Stitched by generations of women, these quilts represent a tangible link to the family's past, right? It can be touched, it's tangible. It can be moved from one generation to the next. It moves from Mama to Dee, to Maggie. It's moved, from their great grandmother to their mother, that type deal. Mama's connection to them is deeply personal and practical, right? That's what she's wanting to, see her daughters have them have that view on these quilts. She envisions them being used and loved, saying, here again, this is my first quote. Um, I promised to give the quilts to Maggie for when she marries John Thomas. And notice how, again, because I don't mention Alice Walker by name, I have to put her last name and then page number. Notice there's no comma. There's nothing. I have an open quotation mark. I have a closed quotation mark. Then I have parentheses, and my period goes out on the end. Now, again, the one is the footnote. If I click there, it's going to actually take me down. It's going to be at the very end of the page. Again, you can either use footnotes. If you need to know how to use them, please let me know before you start using them if you don't understand how they go. Otherwise, I would just keep this format and then do your works cited page. Um, Again, this shows her intention for the quilts to continue their function within the family, serving a practical purpose and connecting Maggie to her heritage. Okay, fair enough. This contrasts sharply with Dee's perspective, with her newfound appreciation for heritage, right? Here again, she's coming back from college. She went away, right? She has a little bit more of a liberal sense. I mean, think about too when you're thinking about these types of things. You've all had U.S. history and world history classes, I hope. What was going on in the 60s and 70s, especially in Georgia or America at the time? We just got finished maybe with the Korean War. We were getting really into the Vietnam War. There's a lot going on with that, right? Woodstock, hippies. Um, so, Dee went off to college, and she sort of got a lightning or got more liberated with her ideas than Maggie did because Maggie stayed home with Mama. So Maggie's a little bit more conservative in that nature, not looking at more or less political views, which I mean, really with Dee, you kind of do to some degree because she did change her name. She went through a whole transformation. And in some way, it's like a snake. And I'm not calling her a snake necessarily, but I'm just using the analogy. It's like a snake shedding old skin. When she went to college and came back, there was a new Dee. That was the whole purpose, shedding that old heritage or that old skin who was Dee. Now we're going to change into this new person, which, she gets a whole new identity and name. Um, let's see, with her newfound appreciation for her heritage, Dee sees the quilts as artifacts. Yeah, she sees them as things. She doesn't necessarily see or understand the deep history from Mama's and Maggie's point of view. We got a conflicting point of view at this point. Her declaration: Maggie can't appreciate these quilts. She would be backwards enough to put them to everyday use. Again, that's where we get this sort of this title, everyday use. Backwards enough, meaning she's not liberal enough in her thinking. She's not new age enough in her thinking. She's still old school Maggie. Um, she's never going to get out of, she being D has went to the city. She's went to urban area, Georgia. Maggie still lives in the past in urban or in rural Georgia. So there's a difference there, right, when it comes to the setting as well. When we think of urban cities, right, we think of Atlanta, Macon, Savannah, Columbus, stuff that's hustling and bustling. They're busy. Jacksonville. When we think of rural areas, we think of places, like farms, which, that could be Darien. It could be Nahana. It could be Hazelhurst. These little towns where there's not a lot going on. And it seems like time and tradition sort of stays where it's at. It doesn't move forward into maybe the next generation of that type deal. At least that's how it seems and feels to these folks that go off and come back and have this really, I don't know, spiritual awakening to a new way of life. Um, so, this reveals her disconnect from the lived experience the quilts represent, meaning D's disconnect. She doesn't view these quilts as, this legacy from grandmother to great grandmother to mother to daughter. She just doesn't see it that way. And that basically that's what even though she claims Maggie's going to put them to everyday use, she basically just wants to hang them up and have them draped down like curtains. And in some way, that is everyday use because they're going to get dirty. They're going to get, they're going to get dust. And she's probably not going to be one that's wanting to, dust them or wash them on a regular basis. Again, now if you look, I just put the page number because I've already mentioned Walker once up here. I don't need to do it again since I'm using the same story and I'm talking about Walker's everyday use. And in this case, it's still the same page, so I just put the page number. Now, if you got to page 2, like here, I still say 55 because I'm still talking about it. But if you wanted to put Walker again, that's fine. You just want to get to the habit where you're not doing it all, every single time because it's kind of distracting. Unless you just need to. The other thing is if you're quoting two things from Walker, let's say I'm doing something from Walker's everyday use and something from Walker's color purple, I'd want to distinguish between the two works. Or if you had an Alice Walker and a James Walker, not related but they have the same last name, again you'd want to distinguish between the two Walkers who you're quoting from. So you're not getting yourself confused, but you're also not confusing your reader, which would be me in the end. She wants to display them, transforming them into static objects rather than functional items, highlighting her more superficial understanding of heritage. D's rejection of her giving name, preferring Wangrango or Wurjero or Wongo, I think is how you would pronounce it, further emphasizes this detachment. She proclaims, I couldn't bear it any longer, being named after the people who impressed me, showing a desire to shed her family history even as she claims to embrace it. Okay? The conflict between Dee and Mama over quilts accumulates in a decisive moment of defiance. Mama's decision to give the quilts to Maggie affirms tradition's practical everyday value. When Mama snatches the quilts from Dee and gives them to Maggie, it reclaims her family's structure. This act reinforces the idea that true heritage lies not in displaying or possessing objects, but in understanding and continuing the tradition they represent. It is Maggie who knows how to quilt, who understands the value and significance of the quilts, inheriting not just the objects themselves, but their legacy, which is, yes, I would say that's a fair assessment there. All right, now we're moving to that second part of the outline that I showed earlier. We're talking about Jackson's the lottery. So turning our attention to the lottery, we meet a more sinister depiction of tradition. Jackson masterfully uses ordinary details to create a sense of normalcy that belies the horrific violence at the story's core, which there is, right? The opening describes children gathering stones, and here we have this quote: Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones, right? Now they're being sort of methodical about picking up what they want to use. They've been here before. This is not a new process to them. And again, as I say here, another really good key literary term, this foreshadowing sets a unsettling tone, um, hinting at the violence to come. The black box, a central symbol of the lottery, is described as a splintered badly along one side, patched with bits of tape and paper. So the black box has been around, right? They keep using the same black box. They're sort of MacGyvering it. They're using bubble gum and super glue and duct tape to kind of keep it going on. They don't want to spend money to get another box unless they just have to. They're using the same box that's been going on for a while. This disrepair, again, symbolizes the decay of the tradition itself, suggesting that its original purpose has been lost or forgotten, which it can. It seems like it's been passed on. Nobody seems to want to spend money, or nobody wants to fix it. They're just sort of, super gluing it and band-aiding stuff together, which we know, the whole saying of kicking the can down the road for another day. Well, it still becomes a problem. Um, it's just we're not dealing with it right now. We'll just, continue to kick the can, kick the problem down the road, continue to band-aid the problem, super glue the issue, uh, until we really need to either repair it, by getting rid of it and actually buying another one, or we just destroy this thing and not worry about getting another one. This is where we get into the character of Old Man Warner, embodies the questioning acceptance of tradition, his response to the mention of the other villagers giving up the lottery, right? Because other people, the other villages around, or other towns around him have given up on this. They sort of seen the light. They realize that this is sort of an old way of thinking. Now, again, going back to, if you're looking at, trying to compare Walker's story with Jackson, notice the old way of thinking was Dee and Mama's, or Maggie's old way of thinking. Dee's was a little bit more liberal in nature. Here, it's sort of it's the other way around. Now the other villages are starting to realize, hey, there was errors in our ways with this. We just need to stop with the whole stones. But this particular village, who's still going on with it, is still keeping up, set in their ways of doing old traditions, which, other folks, as it relates to other villages, are basically questioning that now. It's sort of like, how things were said, how things were done in the, 1800s is a lot different than how they were done in the 1900s or today. There's certain words, there's certain phrases that we use today, that, are a little bit more, I guess you could call PC, politically correct. There's a lot of debate about that. Some things, not everything needs to be politically correct, I don't think. But we do live in a world now that we have to sort of approach it that way, because, if you don't, you risk getting fired, you risk, getting hit, getting shot, getting killed, whatever the case may be. So we're going into this direction, like, there's certain terms and certain phrases that we used in the 80s that, wasn't really cool or popular to use in the 90s, same thing in the 2000s. So again, this, the difference between tradition and language and the way things are working, one decade to the next, one generation to the next. Getting back to this piece, uh, his response to mention other villages, giving up the lottery. Next thing you know, they'd be wanting to go back to live in caves. Again, in a reference to going back to being like cavemen. Reveals the fear and resistance to change that's often accompanied such unexamined rituals. And I believe I'm going to have somebody here wanting to get trash. So let me deal with that first. Yeah. I really don't have much here, but I'll throw it out.
Yeah. Have you heard anything from Octavius?
No, the last I heard, and maybe turned beef before he comes back, I guess, sometime in March. I think he's having some issues maybe with his eyes again.
Well,
I haven't seen him since the beginning of
I've heard,
January.
I've heard a couple of different things. I heard that he might be coming back Thursday, but nobody can confirm that. And I haven't heard anything about, hey, I just know his class got canceled.
Yeah, I'm hoping if it's the eye situation, it's not getting worse.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, I mean, he's driving from Waycross,
Yeah.
that's not a good
Well,
one.
no, he was down, last time he was down in Jacksonville.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's even scarier.
Jacksonville or somewhere down in Florida.
Yeah,
I think he got a place.
well, I mean, if he comes back Thursday, that's great.
Yeah. Oh, let's hope everything's good. Well,
Yeah, I hope so too. All right. Got to do the trash. All right, back. Sorry for that. The blind adherence to tradition is further emphasized by the villagers' casual acceptance of the lottery's proceedings. Miss Duocrix, Duoway. Let's see. I'm going to pronounce this again.
Delacroix.
Delacroix. There you go. Miss Delacroix. Let's hear that again.
Delacroix.
Delacroix. Okay. Delacroix. Despite her friendly demeanor, selects a large stone to throw at Tessie, highlighting the ease with which ordinary people can take part in acts of violence when tradition dictates. Shocking conclusion with Tess' desperate cries of "It isn't fair! It isn't fair!" underscores the lottery's inherent cruelty and injustice. Now, up to that point, until it was her turn and she got chosen, she didn't have this same attitude that it wasn't fair until it became her under the she was the one being the recipient of having rocks and stones thrown at her. This final act of violence conducted with the participation of the entire community, right? So it's the whole village people that are throwing these, even as her own family, right? Her husband, her kids are having to do it. Reveals the devastating consequences of blindly following tradition without question. So that was sort of what happened with these other villages. They stopped because people started to question, what are we doing? What's the end game here? We're throwing stones at somebody. Yes, they're going to get hurt. They're going to die because you're basically stoning them to death, right? Thinking about biblical times. But how's that going to benefit the village? How's that going to benefit their community or their society? You're just going to be one person short of population. So if you're thinking about population control, yeah. If you're trying to control folks in the community by scaring them, that could be a possibility, but it looks like this thing, I mean, it was a lot, the whole name, the lottery, right? It was random. It didn't matter. If your name got chosen, then you're the one that was going to get hit. So it loses, in this case, a family lost a mother because she had kids. A family lost a husband or a wife because she was married. So again, what was the logic? Because now you're just killing off one family member at a time before, natural causes or whatever comes into play. Because this lottery kicks off, right? It was like every June or so. Jackson Stark unsettling portrayal forces us to confront the dangers of unexamined customs and the potential of rituals to become a tool of oppression and violence. You can kind of look at various things that are happening in society now. One thing to kind of look at is how we do, and again, I don't want to try to make this too political, but look at our democratic political process. We, at a certain age, and if you're a citizen, every 4 years or every 2 years, whatever the case may be, with midterms and the Senate and all that stuff. We have the right, no matter, man or woman, age, color, uh, gender, creed, the right to go to the vote if we choose to. It's our right, right? We also have that right if we don't want to. We don't have to either. Some folks don't. Some folks think that their vote doesn't matter. Again, not going to go into too much of the political here, but I'm just saying, think about some of the countries that don't necessarily have as much freedom and right with a democratical process. One comes to mind would be Afghanistan, especially now since Taliban's back in control. Think of how the living conditions there for women and young girls are. They can't necessarily go to school at this point. They're sort of reduced to what Chopin was talking about with, in her story. Even Miss Mallard has a better life, even, than the 2025 women of Pakistan is another one, but Afghanistan. Iran is another place where they kind of tell you who to vote for, and you don't really have any choice. If you go against whatever the party was, Saddam Hussein back in Iraq used to be similar when he was still alive. Uh, it was sort of just ingrained in you. You wouldn't vote for anybody else. How dare you think about, how dare you go against custom and go against Hussein? If you did, you probably wouldn't be alive, today to talk about that. So when you think about the democratic process, that is tradition. And for folks like Afghanistan, and when Saddam was still in power, that was their tradition. You just voted for whoever was still in office, no matter if they were already there for 700 years or whatever the case may be, because there were serious consequences if you challenged that status quo. Since we sort of helped rid the world of the Saddam Hussein and his son's problem. That little sketchy period during the time Bush was in office, and even when Obama was in office, when they were fighting ISIS and stuff, they had a little bit of a democratic process. They were starting to become a little bit like the Western world when it comes to politics. They could go to the voting box. They sort of didn't have that metaphorical or literal, depending on if they did, sometimes they would show up in your house. Hey, why didn't you vote for Saddam and just, commit violence and shoot you? They had another way of, electing officials into office who they thought or who they believed would be a better suit. I don't know how well that's going today for them, but they did have that. They did have that opportunity at one point. I think Afghanistan did too there for a while until again a year or so ago, a couple years ago when we sort of tuck our tail and got out of Afghanistan. But yes, so when we look at this, the shocking conclusion with Tess desperately cries, "It isn't fair. It isn't fair," underscores lottery's inherent cruelty and injustice. So yes, we need to think about some of these traditions that we do. We do need to question some things if it doesn't look right or feel right or seem right. Just because, something's been going on for 30 or 40 years doesn't necessarily mean, especially if there's intent to bring chaos and violence, like in this case with the Jacksons piece. There's just really no end game. It's gonna repeat the cycle over and over. It's gonna kill generations. It's not gonna create generations. You're not gonna have a generation to create if you kill off your entire population or your village. And that's what they were doing, one brick or one stone at a time. The same thing is, if you don't keep certain heirlooms, if you don't know the value of certain things, even though it may look like nothing to you or nothing to your friends, to a family member or to your family, there's priceless value to that. It belonged to somebody in your family. I mean, especially if it was, I think with the Walker piece, it was stuff that was handed down from Civil War era. So it was made during a time, a desperate time, especially for African Americans. But for that to be passed down from decades to centuries to generations, that type deal. And for somebody that just wanted to basically throw it up for it to collect dust, I mean, that's not treating your family in the respect and tradition that it needs to. All right, I know this has gone on a little bit longer. I wanted to kind of make up for week 2, kind of go over some of the stuff that's to come. Again, if you want to send me a draft of this week's assignment or of your SA1, please do so. I would say with the SA1, because that thing's going to be due on Sunday, the 9th, which again is Super Bowl. Pretty much everybody about 5 or 6 o'clock is going to be watching that game. So what I would suggest, if you're going to send me a draft of SA1, I would probably do so by Friday, February 7th. I mean, the earlier the better, but if something goes on and you can't get it to me early on, I would definitely do it by Friday the 7th. That way, if, I can't really get it back to you Friday, at least I would have Saturday to get it back. And I would try to get it back to you, obviously, by Sunday. But if you send me drafts on the 8th or the 9th, I can't guarantee I'm going to be able to read it, especially if there's other drafts coming in from not only other classmates of this class, but my 4 other classes. So, you look, today's 28th, the 9th is here. So you basically that's 1 week. So that's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You have 12 days from now. If you want to count today, 13. You basically all had all of last week because, again, the topics were up there. So that was another 7. So you nearly had 20 days to work on SA1. Again, next week, I will give you some more information about exam 1. That will probably be due by the 16th, I believe, of February. But I double check that. You can look at the syllabus to see. And then, starting on the 17th or so, we will start our next 5 weeks of poetry. I hope everybody has a good week. I will say Thursday is going to be kind of a really busy day for me if you try to get in touch with me, mainly because the college is doing their winter graduation in Jessup at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So my schedule is going to be sort of all over the place. I got to attend that. So if you try to reach me, just know I may be traveling from Brunswick to Jessup later in the afternoon. So it may be, Friday sometime that you may get something back from me, just because we're not going to get out of there until 8 o'clock. It's going to be, nearly a 12-hour day for me. So I would try to answer, any type of emails I might have prior to, 3, 4 o'clock before I have to get on the road to go to Jessup. But, anything after 6, by the time I get back to Brunswick, if we get out at 8, it's probably going to be closer, 9, 10 o'clock, something like that. I'm not going to feel like reading any emails, honestly, no offense, but you'll probably get me better, more alert, more awake, sometime Friday morning. All right. Well, I'm going to say adios, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your week 3. And, don't fret. Don't, wait till last minute to reach out if you need help. Please, that's what I'm here for. Ask for it. I can do a lot more if you ask for help before I start grading stuff. When I start grading things, it's beyond asking for help at that point. All right. Have a good week.